Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force-Space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, AI Futures, Can We Imagine Otherwise? To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Force-Space, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Force-Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects in development across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so we welcome comments, questions there via the chat, and we'll get those to our panelists. For those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know and we'll get a microphone to you so that everyone can hear. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Concordia Public Scholar and PhD candidate in Film and Moving Image Studies, Jacob Pitre. Jake, welcome in.
Thank you so much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Welcome. So I wanted to start by thanking Douglas and Jacqueline and everyone at Force-Space for having us and organizing this and setting it up. Very thankful for that. And thank you all for coming both in person and on Zoom. I really appreciate it, especially on what feels like the first day of spring, I think, like maybe third spring, but maybe this one will stick. So yeah, the event today, AI Futures, Can We Imagine Otherwise? I'm gonna give a little introduction and then I'll introduce the panel that we have assembled as well. So throughout the 20th century, not to go back too far, but artificial intelligence was kind of this dominant theme in both real life technological development, but also in science fiction narratives and things that we got used to seeing within these kind of imaginaries, right? Both utopian and dystopian. I think a lot of these discussions have not changed very much from the 20th century till now, right? There's these fears about AI overtaking humanity in a variety of ways, leading to the downfall of our species. There's fears about machines replacing us in our jobs and our relationships. There's excitement about AI being able to free us from the constraints of labor or creating new kind of like innovative pathways for human development, right? Broadly speaking, I think that these discourses are still quite recognizable to us today in this age of generative AI, which is kind of more specifically what we're going to be talking about today. Which is why I wanted to start off this event by invoking this kind of historical context, however briefly, right? To remind us that no matter what we hear in the news or on social media or in ads, very rarely are we facing something that is truly entirely new, right? The kind of like specific and unique hold over innovation and novelty, I think, is one of Silicon Valley's founding myths, right? Where we're always being asked to live in awe of what they impose on us. And so it's this feeling of imposition, just to give kind of an idea of like what my work and my research is. This feeling of imposition is where my own research actually got started on my PhD, where I was frustrated by this feeling that everything from the tech industry was essentially being launched at us and we have no choice but to react and adjust, right? The common narrative is that these technologies and these platforms that we deal with every day are inevitable. At the same time, right, our governments and policymakers have lagged far behind, though we are at least, I think, seeing some movement in recent years to try and make up for lost time, even if it might be too little too late. So as a result, right, of all these narratives around this inevitability of these technologies, I think it has become more and more difficult to think about the future or any future that is not in some way informed by these narratives and these technologies. We aren't given the space to have these conversations, right? Conversations about whether we want or need the technology that's being imposed on us, or even just about what alternatives could look like, right? That space so often just isn't there. Which leads me to today's event, right? Where I really wanted this to be this kind of space where even if just for a couple hours, we can have these conversations. And I thought what better way to do it than to gather some of the smartest people I know on these topics to talk about it. So with that said, I will introduce our panel. So Paris Marx is the host of Tech Won't Save Us, a great podcast you should all listen to, and the author of Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation. also a great book. Elena Altheman is PhD candidate in film and moving image studies here at Concordia University. She's also the coordinator of the Platform Lab research group here, and she's a screenwriter in the animation industry. Ceyda Yolgörmez, did I get... Okay, Ceyda, sorry, is a postdoctoral researcher at the Indigenous Futures Research Cluster, working the Abundant Intelligences Research Program, which I'm going to ask about in a little bit. So in terms of format for today, I'm going to start us off with some questions for each of them individually, kind of find out what their work is like and how it intercedes with the kind of topics I've just laid out. Then I'll have a few kind of broader questions for us to talk about. Then I have a little slideshow of some AI examples that we can kind of get our reactions to, and I'll invite the audience as well to share any reactions they have. And then we should have a little time at the end for a little Q&A. So, with that said, I guess I'll just start with Paris, if that's okay. So something I wanted to ask you about, right, is like, I think you've built this really nice career around tech critique, right? But I still remember this post of yours from last year that really stood out to me, where you were talking specifically about generative AI, kind of closing us off from this idea of a better future, which clearly spoke to me in this moment as I've been thinking about all these things, and you related it to this great 2014 speech that Ursula K. Le Guin gave. So I was wondering if you could maybe kind of sum up what your argument was there, and I guess why that kind of Le Guin speech that gets talked about in different ways kind of felt like a good way to kind of place what you're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. Great to be speaking with all of you. I think, as we've kind of been seeing this generative AI moment happen over the past year or so, it has been interesting to see a lot of the narratives that have emerged around it. As you were talking about kind of the ideas of science fiction through the 20th century, it seems like so much of those ideas have really affected how we think about new technologies and even the technologies that we need to pursue. So now we have these more advanced chatbots because chatbots are not an inherently new thing anyway. And now they need to indicate that we're getting close to computers being as smart as machines and potentially taking over everything and being a threat to all of us. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that we begin ascribing these kinds of science fictional ideas to these technologies. And of course, Ursula K. Le Guin wrote many things, but I think most people recognize her as a science fiction writer. And in this speech that she gave in 2014, she was obviously not reflecting on AI necessarily, but rather on the broader kind of capitalist impacts on the publishing industry and on the types of stories that were being told and those broader effects. And so as I look at generative AI, particularly as we're talking about chatbots being used in writing or these image generation softwares and things like that, my worry is more that these technologies are trained on a bunch of information that has been pulled off of the web, a bunch of books, a bunch of things that have been written, a bunch of images that are already out there in people's, creative styles and things like that. And so when you put a prompt into these machines, it is churning out something that is based on what it has already been trained on, right? And so if we're thinking about, new creative styles, about, telling different kinds of stories, about thinking about what a different kind of future could be, these technologies that some of these people developing them want us to believe is the future of how we're going to do everything, suggests that we're just going to be repeating the same things that already exist over and over and over again. Something that I think we can already see capitalist pressures resulting in beyond AI and beyond technologies with the type of culture that is being pushed by Hollywood and different types of industries. But I think it's worrying to think that we would start handing over more of human creativity or more of the creativity that goes on in our societies over to these technologies that are just kind of churning out things based on what already exists, trying to act like it's something novel when really it's just making it easier for companies to commercialize the creativity that already happens. Something that is often difficult to commercialize, but this is the way that you make money off of it essentially.
Yeah. So I guess maybe thinking a bit more about where this narrative becomes codified, I think something you've done very well in your work is also spend a lot of time critiquing a lot of the big personalities within big tech Most specifically, you're probably the expert of Elon Musk thought.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. But I guess like aside from him, like do you see kind of similar dynamics playing out with how generative AI specifically has been kind of pushed on us by certain figures in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Like these ideas that define how we're talking about AI right now are not the invention of a year ago, right? They have much longer histories, both when you're talking about the 20th century and the emergence of artificial intelligence and these ideas in the 1950s, but even more recently with how these discussions within Silicon Valley about what they think AI is going to be and can be have been happening for a couple decades now. With people who are more obsessive about the technology, who are maybe people who are lesser known to the wider public, but of course people like Elon Musk kind of getting on that train around the mid-2010s, starting to push these ideas, and many other people around him having particular ideas around AI being a threat to humanity because it potentially means that these computers are going to reach or exceed the level of human intelligence, and then will try to enslave us and all this kind of stuff, right? I think that these are very science fictional ideas that are not grounded in much reality, but are shaping kind of the discourses that we're having now about these technologies that these companies are putting out. But I think the most notable kind of new addition to, if we're talking about particular individuals within Silicon Valley who are pushing particular ideas is, of course, Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI. And he has been pushing these particular ideas at different times. Like he kind of pulls from all the whatever works for him.
Right.
At times he'll say that AI is like going to be very helpful to us and is going to, be everyone's doctor and everyone's educator, and it's going to be all great and fantastic. But then he'll also kind of turn around at times and say, oh, but also it's a threat to everybody, and we need to be really concerned, like depending on the audience he's talking to and which narrative it makes sense for him to use. But I think when I look at Altman in particular, the broader kind of push or the thrust of the argument that he's making is essentially that these AI technologies that, of course, his company is developing need to be integrated into virtually everything that we do. It needs to become like a core feature of human society, how we work, how we live, everything. Right. And even though he's begun acknowledging this, that will have an incredible environmental impact in terms of the need for water resources, for energy resources, for mining in order to create all the computers that will be needed to run all of these AI tools in massive data centers around the world. He recently acknowledged in an interview at the World Economic Forum in February that this will require an energy breakthrough in order to realize the future that he wants to see, and recognizing that the energy breakthrough is not necessarily on the cards. He said that we could geoengineer the earth in the meantime, so that we can keep creating all this stuff, burn all the fossil fuels to power it, and this is how we'll make up for the lack of an energy breakthrough until it arrives. Yeah. I think that's a very worrying type of future to be advocating for, but that's where he wants to lead us.
Yeah, thanks. And then, well, related to that, right, is like another kind of recent argument you've made about this kind of like post-digital revolution that we've come to, where it seems to the initial promises that we had about a lot of these things have kind of failed in a lot of ways. And then part of your argument there is that it seems like kind of an apotheosis of that is the generative AI like sludge that we've been kind of like exposed to. So I guess, what was that promise, I guess, as you first see it? And then how have we kind of like reached this kind of like state of failure that we seem to be in now?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of this like conspiracy theory called the dead internet theory, which essentially says that, most of what happens online is just kind of bots and like nothing is real, and all the bots are just kind of talking to one another. And, I think most people generally accept that that is not how the internet currently works, but it looks like AI is kind of increasingly moving us in the direction where you have all this text and all these images generated by machines that are being responded to by other machines. And it's like, where is kind of the human in that loop? But, if we think back to the late 80s and early 1990s, when the internet is starting to kind of come into the public consciousness, there is a lot of theorizing around what that is going to potentially mean for human society, right? This thing is going to open up, especially when it's commercialized in the early 1990s and privatized in 1995, that, there's going to be this big explosion of creativity and kind of people being able to get together in this space where we can communicate with one another in a way that we couldn't before. And of course, there's plenty of talk then about how you're going to be able to leave all kind of the baggage of the real world at the door. Your race won't matter, your class won't matter, and your sex won't matter. None of this stuff matters because everyone's going to be treated the same online. Of course, we know that is not how it ultimately worked out. And it was, of course, white men who were making all these promises at the time, and very not worried about what companies were going to mean for the internet and what commercialization was going to mean, but worried about what the state could mean and the potential kind of regulations that happen there. Of course, what we have seen with what happened online and how the internet has developed is, there was this explosion in the 1990s, then this crash in the early 2000s, then this kind of consolidation where you basically had an enclosure of what happened online with the platforms, right? Your Amazons, your Facebooks, Googles, all this kind of stuff, right? And so now we depend on these few major platforms in order to do what we want to do online. And so this promise that it was going to be this kind of incredible flourishing, I think it was there for a certain amount of time, not exactly how these people described it, but as that commercialization has increasingly become entrenched and has taken over everything that we do online, and especially as the increased pressures for these companies to turn a profit and to maximize their profits have resulted in the erosion of the experiences that people have on these platforms. If you go on Facebook now versus 10 years ago, it's a very different experience. Or many of these platforms in general, the number of ads that Google throws at you, how Facebook throws you all this kind of increasingly now AI generated images and stuff just to kind of keep you engaged and looking at things and hitting likes and all this kind of stuff, is essentially the use of the internet has declined in quality. And now with generative AI, which is pulling everything off of the internet in order to train these models, what we're basically seeing is the constant churning out of SEO optimized and AI optimized content that really has no substance to it, but is just about, again, getting engagement, getting people to look at ads next to it, all this kind of stuff, is further degrading what promise existed there. And I think it brings up the question of, what did this digital revolution actually result in? To what degree did we benefit from it? And are the benefits further being eroded in order to allow for the commercialization and the maximization of profit? And at what point do the drawbacks of what this world that they've created exceed the benefits that we've received from it?
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, then again, related to that is, I think, going to be something we're going to talk about a lot more, but how all of this is now affecting various creative industries in different ways, right? And so in your case, in media and journalism, I think, we've seen many jobs already lost, many publications trying to slip AI under the radar into their into their publishing. So I guess just generally speaking, what is your kind of sense about how this push is changing the media landscape?
Yeah, it's very negative. Just briefly on that point, it's not entirely a new thing. Since since journalism started going online, there has been a real threat to the business model of how that actually works, because of course journalism is mainly a business in our country. Obviously we have the CBC and Radio Canada, but beyond that, it's mostly private. And so a lot of media previously relied on advertising revenue and classifieds revenue, and of course Craigslist initially took over the classifieds revenue, and then of course Google and Facebook took over the generalized kind of ad revenue that used to go to newspapers. And so you had this general erosion in the business model of how journalism worked. So over the past couple decades, there have been increasing cuts to newsrooms, whether it's newspapers, cable, or news broadcasters, things like that. But now with the generative AI push, there is not only the desire to it's happening in this moment when these crises are all kind of aligning at the same time. And so newsrooms are trying to both see, on the one hand, how they can churn out more content, depending on the type of newsroom that you're talking about, in order to keep people engaged, in order to keep people looking at it, in order to have things showing up in kind of Google rankings and things like that to get traffic going to the website, so that they can make a bit more money that way by using less human labor in order to do it. But then at the same time, since they have these large libraries of content, some of them are looking at whether they can license that to AI companies in the short term, to get a bit of short-term profit, but I think in many cases not considering what the long-term potential impacts of that would be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think that's a nice transition. I'm gonna ask Elena a few questions, right, on this labor point, right, of you're working in the animation industry, which I think, as an outside observer, seems to be one of the industries that seems most vulnerable to the kind of inroads that Gen AI is making for a lot of companies that want to save a buck or whatever they want to do. So I guess, like, what is your sense about how generative AI is being discussed in your industry, specifically from this labor perspective?
Well, famously, I guess at the end of by the middle of last year, Jeffrey Katzenberg, the infamous former Disney executive, founder of DreamWorks and Quibi,
Right. Yeah.
the great platform, he famously said last year that in 3 years, 90% of animation jobs would be cut due to the use of AI in the industry. And that is a very alarming position, which some executives in the industry have not exactly replicated, but coming from a person in such a huge position of power within the industry is very concerning for us, like workers. So what I see right now is that, well, actually, very interestingly, a report came out in not even a month ago, commissioned by the Animation Guild IATSE, and they surveyed 300 bosses within the animation industry, the entertainment industry, but mostly working in animation, and 99% of them said they are already using generative AI in the business. So it's not as much as a question of what's going to happen, it's more of like what's already happening for us.
Right.
And as you mentioned, the animation industry is a very fragile industry. And as we've seen with the financialization of the entertainment industry in the last couple of years, the animation departments all over the world have been scrapped in different like streaming platforms, different media companies. So it is already a very fragile industry that, due to historic reasons, mostly like, well, animation is for kids and that kind of thing, that has always been put like in second place regarding like live action cinema. The fragility of the industry is it's showing even more now with the rise of Gen AI. And the thing for me that is most concerning is that the workers are pretty much united in the whole idea of that these tools, and I want to talk a little bit about my perception of this, that's why I say tools, but the use of these tools are going to do for their jobs, and specifically for what it means to be a creative nowadays, to be a creative person, to be working in the creative industries. But the executives are like all moving in the opposite direction, right? They're all saying that, no, AI is going to be good for your jobs, it's going to make your jobs easier, and that is not the thing we have been observing in the industry. And when I say tools, and say it like this, is because most of these executives, like, they equate generative AI to things such as focus pulling or 3D modeling, as if it was just another tool to aid in work, but it's actually doing the work for the workers, right? So it's not as much as a tool that's like, because workers per se, we are not afraid of technology.
Right.
We're not scared of technology. We even, like, in a very Marxist point of view, like, technology, if it's helping us to alleviate our labor, it's good, right? It's what's it supposed to be doing,
Right?
not doing our jobs instead of us, right? So that's why I say, like, tools. I don't really regard Gen AI as a tool that functions to help us. I know it's a very, like, alarming thing to be like, oh, they're gonna be replacing us, but for minor, like, as we say in industry, like lower skilled positions in the creative industries, they are in fact replacing people, and
Right.
and that's the scenario we kind of have right now.
Yeah. So with this kind of split, right, between the executives and the workers, I guess like what, I mean, we saw like the Writers Guild in America had a lot of, they were able to win a lot of like AI protections in their strike last year. But I guess on a more maybe global scale, right, where like you're saying, there's a lot of fragility in a lot of these industries. What kind of organizing are you seeing on the worker end, I guess?
Ooh. Okay, so last week just the SAG-AFTRA just came to, they just ratified a new agreement with the AMTMP, I never know what
The studios,
the
yeah.
Association of the Motion Picture Studios. They just ratified a new deal that expanded a bit on AI regulations, but the agreement they have come to already shows how much AI tools are already ingrained in the job, because it's not as much as protecting us from AI as much as it's more like how are we going to deal with AI now. So they've reached a couple of like agreements, and I wanna highlight that one of the agreements they reached was that only human voice actors, only humans can be called voice actors. So like if it's a voice created by AI, it's not going to be credited as a voice actor.
Right.
Another part of the agreement was that every studio that wants to use Gen AI for voice dubbing and voice acting, as I said, they have to bargain and deal with the union. So before they would use any type of AI generated voice, they have to talk to the union, and the union will talk to the voice actors themselves in order to like a better type of agreement.
Right.
So it's not as much as like no, AI can't be used, but if AI is going to be used for that, we still have to consult the workers. I think it's a victory because, as we've been saying, AI is not going to go away, at least not for now. So I think it's a victory. And what happens in the United States is something that always trickles down to other markets.
Right.
Even if, for instance, I work in the Brazilian animation industry, even if we don't have a proper union or a guild, we do have associations. And since the industry is small in pretty much every other country, that it's not like Japan or the United States or Canada and France, like people tend to know each other and talk to each other. So as we saw with the WGA strike and the actors strike last year, yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And it really did like inspire a lot of movement within the workers in those industries outside the US. The biggest issue is that creative and cultural industries in any country really needs a lot of like state dialogue and state support in order for it to happen. And we all know how media companies are also lobbying at the same time with the same administrations that were supposed to be creating like legislation to protect us. So it's a political game, right? And we're living right in the how do we say this in English? In the middle of the eye of the hurricane.
Eye of the storm.
The eye storm. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel the future is very bleak, but I don't want to be that person. So I might wait a little bit more for like our discussion. But yeah, we see workers talking to each other, but no actual political organizing. If that sounds paradoxical, it is.
There's not a larger movement.
It is because first and foremost, these workers need to survive and make money, and because we're talking about real people working in the real world and like having to eat real food. So people have it's a tale as old as time, right? Like, do we organize, do we fight, or do we just accept the little bits that we have in order to be able to like survive in this industry? So yeah.
Well, I guess then if I can just ask maybe quickly, right, like to go back to what you're saying about seeing these things as tools or not, right? I guess perhaps under different conditions, do you see a world in which these types of technologies could be used in your industry in a way that is helpful and is ethical. Again, probably not under capitalism, but some kind of ideal, perhaps.
Honestly, and this is my opinion,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't see generative AI because of the whole aspect of how it is structured from
Collecting.
gleaning
Yeah.
works from real people. So I don't see how generative AI can be used as an ethical tool to create. I do see that like how some AI tools might be used to aid, for instance, a writer. An AI tool that helps with grammar might be very useful, might be like make your work faster and more productive in a way.
Yeah.
But if I'm thinking about generative AI in terms of like illustration or storyboarding or character design or even writing, I don't see how that can be used in an ethical way, again, because of the way how it was thought of, because of the way it collects their database, And something you said that was always it's always also something I really think about is that if we are using generative AI to write a new spec script or a new pitch bible or whatever, and I'm going to be very controversial right now, but what's kind of the point of it, right? If you have an idea and you want to be a writer, and I've been a writer my whole life, but professionally for more than 15 years now. So if you're trying to create something new, which is, I guess, like the potion one of being human, a human being in this world, if you're trying to create something new and you're using a tool that is not as much a tool to like help your work, but a tool to create your work for you,
Right.
what's in there for you? You know what I mean? What are you doing?
Right.
And I think some of the things that the executives, they talk a lot about is how Gen AI opens up new possibilities for people. Again, I'm going to be kind of controversial right now, but if you want to be a writer and you don't want to put your time into reading, into writing, into looking at the world and thinking about possibilities and thinking about what's new and thinking about details and thinking about whatever, I don't think you really want to be a writer. You know what I mean? Right. And it's not related to AI, but I always like to bring up this example about screenwriting manuals, where very much like, it's not AI, but they are very much like dictating what a script has to be and like the act structure and whatnot. And whenever I'm teaching writing for kids, for young adults, I always like to mention Abbas Kiarostami's Close Up. There's this beautiful scene of this tin can rolling down the street, and it's like a 5-minute scene of there's just a tin can rolling down the street. And he said it was something that happened while he was shooting the movie, and he thought it was really beautiful, and he wanted to put that in his movie about making movies. And if you think about it, a screenwriting manual would say that that's not what you have to be doing, right? To create a successful 3-act structure for a movie. And I think when you come up with a story or something through generative AI, you're kind of missing the tin can rolling down the street, You're kind of missing that detail, that je ne sais quoi that makes it.
Right, those models are never going to do something like that, right? They're going to take from everything that's already.
Yeah. And so I think, I don't know, I come from more of like a hands-on industrial perspective, like working on it. And I really think that these things, why does Studio Ghibli's movies are so, like, why do people love them so much? Because they have this characteristic of being something that you can see how much time and love and skill was poured into it.
Yeah.
And I think, and this again, it's my opinion, I think that if you need to make use of a generative tool, again, tool to create your work for you, and you don't want to put the time of practicing and training and failing, you know, and
Right.
like, I don't think you want to be a creative person,
Right.
right? But again, sorry. If
No,
that's,
yeah. No, thank you. I mean, you're here to share your controversial opinions. But I think I'm going to now transition to Ceyda.
Very
And
sweaty.
yeah, so I want to ask you, because I guess you do use some of these technologies in your work, or you're thinking about them from this kind of sociological perspective. But I guess, so first, maybe can you kind of tell us about what the Abundant Intelligences project is, and what you're specifically trying to do with it?
Yeah, so yes, I'm a sociologist by training, but I did get into this project called Abundant Intelligences, which is an indigenous-led, indigenous majority network of scholars working on AI and indigenous philosophy and creatives and artists, and bringing them together to, well, actually bringing indigenous epistemologies to AI research, let's say. But the idea is, can we bring in the communities into the technological design processes? Can we bring them into the fold and actually, yeah, like I've been taking so many notes on all the things that you're saying, and like, can we circumvent like all these like problems that are kind of coming up because these tools are, yeah, they're basically becoming additions to capitalistic systems, or and as if they're going against creativity. Yeah, if the structures are, you know, all about exploiting workers who are themselves tools to capitalists anyways, like what other being can stand a chance, you know? So yeah, the Abundant Intelligences is about maybe finding different kinds of intelligences and not just tool-like intelligences. And can we bring in these different kinds of starting points to the design of technology in general, but AI in particular? Yeah, I don't know what to say. Should I publicize more?
Well, I guess just what you're specifically trying to do in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just switched to a postdoc there. I was working on the project on various roles. I've been coordinator, blah, blah, but currently I'm looking into, so our research program is organized around pods, which are basically like research labs actually, and they're located, one in New Zealand, one in Hawaii, and one here in the Western University and the Lethbridge. And yeah, the idea is obviously to fund these pods that are community grounded, that also have media labs to kind of bring in community and do research with them, and to see how they can come up with different imaginaries for designing AI, and then yeah, also putting maybe AI scientists, you know, together with indigenous philosophers and see what comes up, kind of. And yeah, my project is going to be about going around these pods and seeing what kind of abundant intelligences are being conceived. And if, of course, because this is a high-risk project, obviously, but high reward too. Because, yeah, we don't know if the AI scientists and the indigenous knowledge holders or keepers are going to be able to speak the same language, or if they're going to be able to hear each other meaningfully. Yeah, so an idea for me is also to facilitate that kind of cross-pollination, I guess, in a way.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, to me, this seems like a project that is really trying to do the work, the conceptual work that I was saying, you know, like it's hard to find the space to have these kind of like conversations and place to have these kind of like ways to think about alternative futures. So I guess like what kind of, I mean, you've already talked about, are they going to speak the same language, but what other kind of challenges do you think this kind of like conceptual work is going to have?
I think one of the challenges is, as you said, there's this kind of optimism that we're trying to bring to the table, and that's a tricky thing. Because, yeah, being optimist around tech is so much about, it has become so much of a Silicon Valley trademark that, like, can we actually not let these, like, guys who are trying to become superheroes, and can we actually think and imagine for ourselves, and can we actually think about, yeah, technologies that might be beneficial to us and to our communities, and not to these I don't know, Elon Musk changing his stock options or whatever. I don't understand these financialization systems. But yeah, can we actually be again joyful about technology? Because this is something we've lost, right? I mean, I don't know, like when I was young, like yeah, but it's true. When I was a kid, it was all like, oh yeah, it's like a different thing. And also internet facilitated so much of my socialization actually. Like I was able to join all these like gaming groups, whatever, through internet. And so I always thought, yeah, technology is such a cool thing, and like, can I actually get into it? And then yeah, realizing how actually the space is just so polluted and honestly very anyway, I don't want to get into that now. Maybe we'll get into the race issue later. But yeah, can we bring in joy, and can we actually bring in very grounded needs to the table? And can we actually change maybe design processes? That's also another challenge, right? Like, can we create a formulaic way of designing tools that we can then replicate in different indigenous communities? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so then it also makes me think of what I know about your previous work, where you were looking quite specifically at like what, like the idea of like human-machine relations is and how that works. I guess, so from that previous kind of work and then kind of your newer work, do you see those kind of relations changing, I guess, in this age of generative AI, or do kind of your findings about what it is to engage with the machine is kind of the same or different?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so obviously in my day job, I'm in abundant intelligences, and then my night job is being a sociologist, I guess. So thinking about, yeah, human-machine relations as understood today is usually within this kind of labor matrix, right? Like we're using them as tools, we're trying to employ them to do our bidding or whatever, and capitalists wants them because they think it's gonna write them a script. It's not going to, hopefully not. But so yeah, the question that I pose is about, can we actually reimagine these relations? Because obviously what is happening right now, which is like coming all the way from Babbage, you kind of alluded to the history of AI. You know, Charles Babbage himself was thinking about like labor's controlling the labor when he came, like, well, in parallel, he came up with the idea of an analytical engine. So the idea of extraction and control was already there from the beginning, it seems. But can we still save some space, and can we still create a different space where we can actually excavate relations that are different, that can create difference, and can we reimagine the landscape for that, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the contexts in which maybe AI doesn't have to become like this harm for all machines, have to become this like, you know, oh, this thing that we need to be against, or something that reminds us of our emancipation and so gives us this dreary kind of sense, I guess, or something for like becoming a super intelligence, which is another, again, racist trope that I don't want to get into right now. Yeah, what are the spaces for this? And yeah, the spaces are very narrow, I think. In my own work, I've been collaborating with my engineer friend, who builds some robots, for instance. And it's all these like cute little robots that are very playful. And, you know, we're kind of exploring how like algorithmic play can translate into the real life, everyday context. And what does that mean? And what does that bring into the table? Or yeah, using like generative AI to create text, but kind of using it as a way to actually critique the contemporary notion of the author as like this genius, that things that we should marvel and yeah, and obviously is dying also. So like, what are the different kind of relations we could cultivate there was another question. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I think it was really seeing abundant intelligences where I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's actually these kinds of spaces, because without changing the context of production, without changing the relations of production, yeah, it's impossible to like create something that's going to be, you know, not necessarily beneficial, but even like just not extractive and not like, you know, going against the what it means to be human, I guess. Yeah, does it?
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, nice transition to, I just have a couple questions now for any of you to speak to. And that thing of like thinking about non-extractive ways makes me think back to like Elena, what you said about like in your industry, but also in general, my attitude is generally like the problem is very rarely the technology itself. It's the way that it gets implemented under capitalism or whatever. And so, I guess what relation do you all see between kind of imagining otherwise in an AI context, but also imagining otherwise in a larger like capitalist systemic structural issue? Like, how do you kind of see these things being related? Which is a big question, right? Like, we're all kind of asking these questions of like, we are in this poly crisis or however you want to term it. And it seems like something has to give. So I guess like, we can talk specifically about thinking otherwise about AI, but perhaps the conversation is really thinking otherwise about capitalism and the structure we're under. So I guess, how do you think about that in relation?
I can start just because I have it and I talk very little, I think. Yeah, imagining otherwise. I think one of the key things here is, I don't know if it's possible to imagine otherwise if you're like at the heart of like San Francisco or whatever. Like, I don't know what that means. I think that's why these guys keep thinking they're imagining otherwise, but they keep imagining the same thing. But I think one of the key things is remembering that like capitalism is not like this totality that's like all consuming and like we have no other way of relating to one another. It's all commodity fetishism or whatever. Like, it's, if we can see that this is not the totality of the relations, and there are relations that are outside, and that's why I'm coming to this indigenous context, I think. Maybe we can then, yes, imagine otherwise. So it's also about, creating your own community, I guess, where you can create relations that do not rely on these give and take tool species being kind of context.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it can be, Silicon Valley basically promotes this idea that the way that we are going to build a better future is by creating new technologies, right? It's not by engaging in politics. It's not by organizing for a better world. It's not by unionizing or anything like that. It is, we need to make these new technologies. We need to roll them out as quickly as possible, move fast and break things. And that is essentially how the world is going to get better. And so when that is the way that you see how you're going to improve anything, you can naturally understand why that is going to lead you away from thinking about alternatives to capitalism or anything like that. But also, what is unacknowledged there is how the technologies that are developed, especially when it's a massive industry, when you're trying to maximize profits, when what gets developed is shaped by venture capital and these kind of broader capitalist forces, is that the technologies that are going to be developed and that are going to be rolled out into the world are the technologies that can make money for the people who produce them, or provide them other benefits over workers and whatnot, right? If we think back to a decade ago when we had our last kind of AI hype moment, when the robots were going to take our jobs and AI was going to automate everybody and all that kind of stuff, what actually happened was not everybody losing their jobs, but capitalists, Amazon, Uber, and then of course many other companies that learned from their example, rolling out technologies to decrease the power of workers and increase the power of management and the people in charge of these companies, right? And so I think, you were talking about the history of this going all the way back to Charles Babbage and stuff. Like, I think we've reached a moment now where we've seen kind of the outcome of giving Silicon Valley all of this power and all of this influence and all of this wealth in order to shape the way that our society works. And I think that we get to the question now where we ask, what kind of society have they created? Who actually benefits from this society? And if we were going to create a better society, what does that require doing? And I think that increasingly one of the answers I come to when I think about that is that there needs to be kind of an unraveling of this technological apparatus that they've created if we are going to try to seize back some of that power, right? Because ultimately rolling out those technological systems and that algorithmic management and the kind of mass surveillance of everything that happens online and even offline now as well, gives them an immense amount of power that needs to be kind of revoked, right?
Yeah.
I can't really say anything about it. So I agree with everything you said. It's hard being the follow-up to this, but I pretty much agree with everything that was said. And of course, like when I say like things such as like, oh, if you're using Gen AI to create your work, it's because the way it is structured right now under the system we live at, it's not something good for the laborers. But if it came to a point where we like thinking about the society we live at and thinking about who is benefiting, who's being benefited by these tools, of course, if we can reach a point where we do not live under these conditions anymore, and hopefully I would love to be alive to see that, but if we ever come up to that point, of course, then the tools, the technology are going to be useful for us creative workers, of course, because it's what you said, it's not the technology per se, it's who is it benefiting,
Right.
and how it is structured, how it is created, what does it need to work, right? So yeah, it's the same. Oh.
Great. No, yeah, so I think in the interest of time, I think we might now switch to my slideshow to look at, let's see if I can figure this out.
Oh, everything. Nice.
Is that, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna, ooh, I can hear myself. I don't like that. Okay, so there's a few examples, right? There's a few that I'm going to start with that are more general examples, and then we'll transition into some that are more specifically about the creative industries. But I just want to get like whatever your kind of like first reactions are. I mean, so the Wonka thing, I think we've all discoursed to death. I don't know if there's anything we want to say about it specifically, but it just kind of is like the obvious example, right? Of like AI being used in a way, it's almost hilarious, like the degree of grift that is going on in a situation like that. And I think it's representative of a lot of things. But the first example is how this is being applied to law. So I just want to watch this for a second.
Happened here with the lawyer.
Okay, so it comes in the context of this divorce case between a multimillionaire and his ex-wife. And so in an application to have his children travel to China that was put into the court last December, his lawyer filed this brief, basically, that relied on two cases, both in which mothers were able to take their children out of town, out of country, which would sound good. But once his ex-wife's lawyers started looking into it, they were like, well, we can't find these cases anywhere. So they ask his lawyer, hey, can you provide us with copies of these cases? According to the documents that I've seen, she goes, looks into it, realizes these cases don't exist. They were, invented by ChatGPT. Which apparently she'd used to help her put together this application. According to these court documents, she wants to withdraw the cases, and doesn't ultimately rely on them in making her argument, but it still becomes a thing before the court, because this application went before the court at some point, and the judge says this is super concerning because it has happened once that we know of in the United States, involving a lawyer who ended up begging for mercy from a court, and it's just a concerning thing here.
So what else?
So right, he refers to this case in the U.S. from last year that got a lot of attention when a lawyer tried to do something similar, and then this case happened in Vancouver like a month or two ago or something. I don't know. Any reactions to, I guess, just like how this is kind of playing into these larger narratives?
You can see how dangerous it is, right? Because he's trying to create new jurisprudence by creating fake cases, and for me that's like a prime example of how dangerous these tools can be when used again within the structure we live right now, right? Okay.
I think it also shows how the narrative around what these tools are is so different from how they actually work. Because if we're thinking about kind of how OpenAI has positioned ChatGPT, it's like, it's you can access like the knowledge of the world, kind of like the way we used to talk about Google in a sense. But like you can just put in your prompt and it will respond, and it will not only tell you what you want to know, but it'll write you an essay, or it'll write you a legal brief or whatever. And like, then you can go ahead and use this and not worry about it so much. And like one of the things that I've heard from some college professors who were like, initially, because there was this initial worry that like students were going to use this to write their essays and blah, 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 is that they were like, once they started reading some of these essays, they were like, okay, ChatGPT has a very clear style. It's very confident, but so wrong because it just makes these things up like out of nowhere, right? So I don't know. I think it's fascinating seeing like the reality of what these technologies are kind of hit this narrative that we've had where they're supposedly amazing and can do everything and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically that was my first reaction too. I think it's like, really, you read something from ChatGPT and thought that was like legitimate or something? Yeah, it has such a particular style, right? And anyone who tried to have a conversation with it, yeah, over time you get to see it. But I think there is a bit too, like what you said about the OpenAI kind of pushing this narrative. Now they claim that AGI is actually the ChatGPT, right? So there's these like, yeah, they just bring in all sorts of concepts, and even tech journalists are buying into these. Like that's another level that you're probably like also not very happy with. Yeah, but there is a bit of like cheapening of intelligence that's going on also. It's like, yeah, nowadays, like we're trying to write this paper about, yeah, what are the definitions of intelligence in AI, and how can we actually go against these to create space for this abundant intelligences notion? And it's a very dark place, also the intelligence research, but still, intelligence is something that we can think about. It's a complex phenomenon, if nothing else. So yeah, this cheapening of like, you put the ChatGPT and then it gave you some cases and you see he tried this, and it's like, okay, but that's not what the initial promise is, and that's not where the conversation could go. So it just makes me sad and bored, I think.
Yeah. All right, this next one is a bit, not that one, for Paris in particular, just this transportation implementation by NVIDIA. So we'll just watch this for a second.
Good morning, Ashley. Navigating to the office.
AI tools like multimodal large language models are revolutionizing the automotive industry. NVIDIA's foundation models, combined with automotive knowledge base and sensor data, create an LLM that's fine-tuned for automotive use cases. Using retrieval augmented generation, the AI assistant deployed in the car is able to perceive, reason, and assist in day-to-day driving scenarios.
Be careful. There's a toy car behind the vehicle.
AI-enhanced surround visualization gives us an unobstructed view of the environment, helping us make safer driving decisions. The assistant is also your trusted advisor, able to access the knowledge base to give you real-time assistance and recommendations in multiple languages.
¿Es posible dar vuelta a la derecha en un semáforo mientras está en rojo?
Sí, en California se puede girar a la derecha en rojo a menos que haya una señal que diga lo contrario.
Perfecto, gracias.
Its ability to read and reason through text also gives the car enhanced situational understanding.
I see you have personal belongings in the back seat. Don't forget to take that with you. We are about to go over our preset $10 limit for the fast track today. Do you want to continue?
Yes.
The AI-enhanced personalization even lets you experience your entertainment at the highest quality. The future of mobility will be defined by how cars are transformed into intelligent companions that make every journey safer and more enjoyable.
Right. So this is NVIDIA, who's like enjoying like such a major moment right now. Like their stock is through the roof. So I'm very interested in what you have to say about this, Paris, because to me it's like this LLM that they're inserting into this car is like solving problems that don't exist, seems to me. But like I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it seems so unnecessary. And like the claim at the end that it's going to make driving safer, like no, it's absolutely not. One of the things that like clearly stood out to me as I was watching the video is how it's not just kind of speaking to you and telling you what's happening, but it's even showing like a little AI woman on the screen.
Avatar, yeah.
But the screen is like down, so you should be looking at the road because you're driving, but now this system is like showing a little woman down here talking to you, so you're gonna like look down to see what she's saying instead of looking at the road, which is what you should be doing. Like I think it just builds on this this push that we've had for a bit over a decade now, where there's this desire to push more and more digital technology into people's vehicles, because obviously people spend a lot of time in there. There's a lot of data that can be captured through it. So the automakers not so much starting, but kind of popularized by Tesla, are putting these massive screens in the cars and removing your ability, or at least some automakers are, to kind of change various settings in your vehicle with kind of physical buttons or knobs or anything, and putting them in the screen. And the argument was that this would make it safer because actually you can just use voice commands and you can adjust the settings that way, and so you can keep looking at the road. What people actually find is that people aren't really using those voice commands, and so they're looking away from the road because they need to try to figure out what to do on these screens in order to actually change settings in the vehicle, which actually is making driving less safe. And I think, to me, like, it's so funny seeing this kind of a concept now in like this AI hype moment, because a lot of what this is speaking to comes out of the previous AI hype moment, when self-driving cars were going to take over and we're going to be everywhere within a few years, and we're going to eradicate all the driving jobs, and you'd never need to drive anywhere again because you could just hail a self-driving vehicle from your phone and it would cost next to nothing and blah, 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 right? The insertion of these massive screens in the cars was in part premised on the idea that within a few years you wouldn't be driving your own car, so you'd be able to look at the screens and watch stuff and whatever. That never arrived because the tech hasn't reached that place, and again, that was a promise that was oversold. And so then to see, like, now we're still doing this AI stuff in the car, and NVIDIA's just doing this fun tech demo to try to sell its products is, I don't know, it kind of turns my stomach, especially when you think that it has very real consequences where people get injured and lose their lives because of car accidents caused by these poor technological changes. In Europe, one of the major auto safety kind of the groups that give like the 5-star ratings and stuff for vehicle safety says that if you don't have, beginning in I think it's 2026, if the automakers don't have physical buttons for key vehicle features, that they will not be eligible for the 5-star safety rating because it's become such a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good leeway into my next example here, which is about deepfakes, but also I think speaks to these regulatory challenges that whatever industry you're thinking about has. So we'll just watch this short clip.
Looks like Congress is getting involved with the Taylor Swift deepfakes now, and that could be a great thing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a bunch of explicit images that looked like Taylor Swift went viral on X a few weeks ago and then got millions of views before they got taken down. And despite all of the conversations about deepfakes in politics, studies show that the vast majority of deepfakes are, no surprise, for porn. 98%. And of those, 99% of them are of women. I've been covering this as a journalist for a long time, and a few years ago I actually spoke to Kristen Bell about it.
And I don't consent, so that's why it's not okay. This is my face. It belongs to me.
The thing is, though, there are all kinds of rules about when people can actually use your face without your consent, including for art and journalism. It's incredibly hard to regulate, but now Congress is trying to figure out what to do about all of this. There's a proposal that would make sharing non-consensual deepfake pornography a criminal act, and there's another that would require a disclaimer. It's a very hard problem, and sometimes it can be hard to feel optimistic about this stuff, but this is how laws get made. Attention gets to a problem, we figure out how to fix it. If anyone can help do that, I think it's Taylor Swift. If you want tech and science news in an optimistic way.
Follow her. Yeah, so I guess, I think generally thinking about the regulatory challenges, right? In this case specifically, but also just with generative AI in general, like, I guess what's our reaction?
I guess I'll start. Yeah, I think it's a serious problem, right? And I think it's very much an underexplored issue that obviously communities who have been affected by this have been talking about it a lot, in particular since the kind of image generators have become more popular over the past 2 years. They kind of preceded ChatGPTs to a certain degree, but there wasn't the same kind of hype around them as when ChatGPT was released. I don't even know where to start with it. Like, it's just a massive problem that has not received the attention that it deserves. There's a growing number of stories coming out about how, obviously we see Taylor Swift being affected by it, and like, she should not be affected by this stuff when she's not consenting to it, and nobody should. But like, when you're a celebrity in the public eye, you're going to be more visible anyway. Not to say that this is okay, but it's also affecting like average everyday people whose images are not plastered all over the web and the media all the time either. And it's becoming a very serious problem in like high schools and among students and stuff like that as well, where in particular, female students are, having people who they go to school with making these sorts of images about them and sharing it around to their friends. And it's becoming a very serious problem that political leaders are not paying enough attention to. But then the question becomes, what can you do from a regulatory perspective to actually stop this sort of stuff from spreading? And that becomes very difficult if the AI companies and the social media companies are not also thinking about the responsibilities that they have. And in many cases, a lot of these AI companies claim that, or some of them at least, particularly some of the ones making kind of open source models that anyone can kind of take and do their own thing to, are saying that they have no responsibility. People are just going to use their tools as they're using them. And I think that people should be facing very serious consequences for making arguments like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sure.
Just to say, but the political leaders aren't paying attention to these things because they're using them probably. Like a case in Turkey was last year leading up to the election. The leading party actually came up with a video about the opposition leader, and I don't even remember the content, but it was like, oh my God, this guy did this. And the electorals are like, oh my God, this guy. And actually it was a deep fake. But in the end, misinformation, propaganda, it's so much, media has always been kind of wreathed with these tactics, basically, and strategies. So I don't know how it is the Gen AI. I think it's very serious. Like you said, I think the corporate intelligences should take responsibility. I completely agree. And the openness thing is another thing that we talked about earlier a little bit. But I feel like this misinformation and propaganda situation won't go away in the next fad of AI anyways.
Yeah.
And even just talking about something a little bit different, but building off of the car example before that, and a little bit about this one. For instance, thinking about, we also saw that, right? The animation, the prompt to video generator, in American Sora.
That's coming up.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I might save my comment.
Go.
No, I was just gonna say that if you think about Sora and if you think about AI generated animation, they have a distinct look to it and they have a distinct aesthetic that, as of this moment, it's still non-commercial, right? They still haven't figured out how to deal with the impermanence of the pixel, which is something I'm very interested in. I'm looking at, I'm trying to write something about that. Yeah. But what it also creates is a whole lot of discourse around Sora, right? About what's it doing, what's it not doing. And this can kind of act as a smokescreen. That's why I mentioned like the car example before, because it's something that it acts a little bit as a smokescreen to hide the lobbying of media companies for like relaxation of labor laws regarding ownership and regarding, mostly, you wanna know what I mean? So like, I think it's something like the cars and like creating these incredibly intricate LLMs for cars, which are not very applicable because they still don't have the tech to do it. It's the same case as Sora, but we are not seeing what's happening under that. So like, as I said before, in animation, a lot of like jobs, like mostly in 3D modeling, they're very much like 3D modeling, storyboarding, in between those jobs. It's what we're not talking about them, because we're like all generating this discourse around like, oh my God, look at Sora is creating like these horrendous images that are really ugly and can't really be used for anything. Mm-hmm. So I was gonna build on that because
Yeah, Sora will come up in a second. But first, I want to show this classic.
Oh, classic.
Yeah, this is a classic. Some of you have probably seen it before, but just to get us thinking more specifically about AI in the creative industries.
人工知能で動きを学習させた CG を見せてくれるそうです。
これ踊ってるように見えますけど、でこれは早く移動するっていうのを学習させたやつなんですね。これ頭を使って移動してるんですけど、基本痛覚とかないし、頭が大事だとかっていう概念がないんで、だからもう頭をもう普通の足のように使って移動してるっていう。この動きがとにかく気持ち悪いんで、ゾンビゲームの動きに使えるんじゃないかっていう。こういう人工知能を使うと。多分人間が想像できない気持ち悪い動きができるんじゃないか。一応こんなことをやっています。実際には
毎朝この頃会わないけど身体障害の友人がいるんですよ。そのハイタッチするんだけども大変なんです。彼の筋肉がこわばってる手と僕の手でこうハイタッチする。でその彼のことを思い出してね、僕はこれ面白いと思って見ることできないですよ。これを作る人たちは痛みとかそういうものについてね、何も考えないでやってるでしょ。極めて不愉快ですよね。そんなに気持ち悪いものをやりたいなら勝手にやってればいいだけで、僕はこれを自分たちの仕事をつなげたいとは全然思いません。極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
これでもほとんど実験なので、
それは分かってます。
その世の中に見せてどうこうってそういうものじゃないんです。
それは本当によく分かってるつもりですけど、どこへたどり着きたいんですか。
まあ人間が描くのと同じように絵を描く機械
を作りたいんだ。
はい。
You almost want to start coming down.
地球の最後の日が近いって感じですね。それは人間の方が自信がなくなってくるからです。
So yeah, I mean, I think this is a classic and it's gone around for, I don't know if Elena, you want to say something?
I love this video. He's so grumpy. He's the best. I feel it talks a little bit about all of the things we were talking about right now, right? It's as if their faces when they say like we want to build a machine that can draw as humans. Why? What's the point of that? Mm-hmm. Right? Like what's the point of that? What's that if not an insult to life?
Right. Well, and like what you were saying earlier, right? Like Miyazaki's probably one of the peak like practice, train, like day in, day out, years and years on a project as a way to live life and a way to enjoy life, and you know, that's why it's like a great video, because it's like to face someone like him with this, like just their reaction of like they can't, like they're just fundamentally so opposed in how they're thinking about this. And yeah, it's like the question of, well, then what are you trying to do? Like,
what will endure? Right? What will remain with us at the end of the day? Is it going to be the Miyazaki's films or whatever creepy zombie in a video game walking like that? I don't know, dragging itself down. I don't know.
Yeah.
And in the end of the day, is what do we humans want for ourselves, mm-hmm. right? What do we want as a species? What do we want as the only, I don't know if only, I think animals can be as creative as we are, but not in the same sense. But what do we want as the only animal that can actually think about our own condition, right? And envision this condition for ourselves. And I think that's what appalls Miyazaki so much, because, well, I don't want to go on a tangent, but he's a guy who was born like right as the Second World War was starting, and he saw like all of the consequences it had, and he applies that to all of his work. And his latest movie is actually like a recollection of what does it mean to build a legacy like in art. What does it mean to be human, right? The title of the movie is like, how do you live? It's
the
right?
better title, the original title.
The actual title is how do you live, right? So
Yeah.
I think it speaks to like, what do we as humans want for ourselves? Do we want 2,000 billionaires to control all the narratives that are to be controlled? And I'm not even saying narratives in terms of like films and media or whatnot, but like in terms of like the world narrative. Do we want to create a machine that can draw better than humans, or do we want to maybe create technology that assists humans in fulfilling creative tasks better? That is a different conversation. But thinking, do we really want that? Do we really want to create a machine that is so perfect in writing that will, I don't know, overcome the yes, the tiger is out poem by Noel, 6 years old, which is like super famous on Twitter. I don't know if it's famous out of Twitter, but I love that poem. But you know what I mean? Is it's yeah. Sorry, my hands are really sweaty.
It's okay. So then I just want to show just a couple quick examples where AI has been showing up. And so this is from the Marvel show Secret Invasion. And you can see, right, the AI aesthetic, like you can see it in these figures, like it's very, clear where it's coming from. And so, but what's interesting about this is like when they got kind of called out for it or whatever, the company behind it, well, first of all, Marvel has its own history with like VFX workers and things like that. So there's that element of it. But then when they were called out, the company behind it called it explorative and inevitable, right? So again, it's this thing of like, well, we're just trying things out. It's inevitable, and this is how it's going to be. Similarly, this is a more maybe niche case, but this movie that's out right now, Late Night with the Devil, got into similar kind of, whatever, Twitter discourse or whatever, because it turned out that it had used AI for a bunch of the images that show up throughout the film, and it became this thing of like some people want to boycott it, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there's one ethical element here about, do you have to boycott entirely like this small indie movie because it used AI? Like that's one conversation, but it is again this idea of like, well, this stuff is inevitable, right? So we can use it and cut a few corners if it makes sense, and that kind of thing. And then so just to lead into then the Sora example. So just yesterday or 2 days ago, Sora came out with like its first real batch of like short films, made by. Basically, they reached out to a bunch of emerging creators, emerging filmmakers, probably because established ones really wanted to do this kind of thing. And so this is just one that stood out to me. There's several that they have come out with in the past couple days.
Beyond Our Reality, a journey through parallel worlds, where we delve into the extraordinary. Episode 1 unveils the giraffe flamingo, a stunning hybrid that roams the savannah with grace and vibrant hues. In Episode 2, we ascend with the flying pigs, charming creatures that redefine the skies with their harmonious flight. Episode 3 plunges us into the depths to discover the whale-puss, an elegant blend of whale and octopus ruling the ocean's abyss. Episode 4 introduces us to the eel cat, an aquatic enigma that combines the sleekness of an eel with the curiosity of a cat. Episode 5 presents the bunny armadillo, a delightful mix of bunny charm and armadillo protection, captivating our hearts. Episode 6 features the horsefly, a small yet noble creature that buzzes with a blend of horse-like dignity and fly-like agility. Episode 7 explores the reptilian aru, a creature that leaps across the desert with the vigor of a kangaroo and the resilience of a reptile. Our adventure culminates in Episode 8 with the fox crow, a fusion of fox cunning and crow freedom soaring through the forest's enigma. Join us on this mesmerizing journey through Beyond Our Reality, a journey through parallel worlds where the marvels of the unknown beckon.
And so then what stood out to me is like this artist in particular posted this, again, this was just yesterday, with the video where it's interesting the way that he talks about it, right? He says, I understand the apprehension surrounding the rapid evolution of our creative industries. I really think Sora offers a different kind of visual canvas, blah, blah, blah. As I continue to be an early artist working with Sora, I promise to be mindful of its profound impact. I will continue to share knowledge. So there is this defensiveness almost built into this, where these emerging creatives are being approached by OpenAI to demonstrate the bizarre abilities of Sora, I guess, but then still having to do this kind of like preemptive, like they know they're going to get pushback from other creatives, right? So I don't know, just general reactions to Sora, and also this kind of weird vibe that seems to be around it.
First of all, I find it really interesting that they mentioned that I have always been a one-person creative studio. And that's really interesting because we all know that film is a highly collective art, right? Like it's one of the few arts that's incredibly collective, and you need a lot of people in order for it to happen. Like you can be a one-person filmmaker, of course. There are several examples of animators who have been working for 10 years in the same feature by themselves. It's fine. But I guess the whole point of this person is like to start their defense into being like, I was always a one-person creative, which is kind of weird. And as you said, it's very standoffish. It's very like, I need to prove a point before anyone comes attacking me. And what you said before about like the Marvel series intro, and they say like, it's inevitable. Well, yeah, cut costing is, you know, like cutting costs it's inevitable under capitalism, right? So that's what's happening. And I feel we need to, we do know, but I feel that whenever we approach this kind of things, we should always be very direct and honest as to why is this happening? Why is a movie that its whole premise is to faithfully emulate a 70s show would choose to cut costs in such an obvious way, right? Like, did they think it would not be spotted? What is the whole point of their premise anyway? If they're trying to emulate this specific feeling of a 70s thing, but they're doing it through AI. And it circles back to what you asked me in the beginning of the conversation about like the future of like, or like the present of labor, because these like cost-cutting measures, these cost-cutting measures, they're like literally killing workers. Because you see a lot of instances of illustrators, animators. An illustrator lost a gig because of that movie, right? And a gig that could have like maintained this person throughout a whole year on one job they did. And that's what we see happening right now. In-flight magazines already, like their illustrations are all done by AI. Again, a gig that could have supported an illustrator for a long time. And and this looks awful, by the way. Like the all of the animals.
It looks barely different than the zombie thing from however many years ago that was, right?
It's insane how ugly it looks, because all of the it's as if like your own tool can't do what it was meant to do, like the card thing, right? It's you're gleaning the internet. There's so many examples of animals, animated animals moving, and the muscles, the things. Then you don't even have to be an animation person to look at that and see like, oh, that's not like a bunny. That's not how a bunny walks, you know. That's not how a hip should be working. So again, for now, commercially, this still is non-applicable. Like it's not something that like David Zaslav is going to look and be like, oh, okay, let's create a full-on feature. But he is behind, for sure, all behind everything being like, okay, how do we make it? How do we make it able to create a whole feature?
It's not there yet, but
yeah.
I think it's also just profoundly disappointing, like that a video like that is supposed to be like the future of creativity that this is enabling. I think when I see it, I have a few thoughts, right? I think on the one hand, we constantly have these discussions about, AI or robots taking jobs and labor being automated away. And the question is like, okay, what labor are we trying to automate? And, if we were able to automate a lot of the work that we do, through technology, what would the types of things that we would want humans to continue doing, like what would we want to preserve for humans? And I think creative pursuits, writing, making film, drawing, all this sort of stuff, I think those are the things that we would most want to keep for humans, right? Because it is that creativity that promotes kind of human flourishing in a sense, right? It's through engaging with creative works that we understand more about the world, and ourselves in many cases. And without that, I think that there's a real kind of there's something really lacking in human society if that is lost or if that is given over to machines. And the real push of these technologies is to basically shift more of that creative work from humans onto machines, not because it's better for humanity, not because it's better for society, not because it allows us to, kind of probe these important questions in an easier or better way, but because it's easier to commercialize, right? Because it's easier to make money off of or to reduce the cost of and things like that. And I think like specifically thinking about the SOAR example, it shows for me how these companies constantly try to deploy new technologies to transform how the creative labor process works in order to reduce the cost, but also, how to put it, to do it in a way where, okay, you have these establishment industries like the establishment publishing industry or the establishment film industry, and they are not going to transform immediately by taking on these technologies. But if you can get some YouTube creator or something like that to start working it into the creative process that they're doing, eventually you create a pressure for it to come over to the more establishment industries that are already using it. We've already seen the publishing industry be not destroyed, but very significantly impacted by new technological trends, by the power of Amazon to increase the pressure that it puts on publishers. And part of the way it was able to do that was, of course, it captured a large market share, but it also created a kind of separate industry of self-published writers who do not get advances or anything like that, where there is a significant pressure to quickly adopt new technologies, to do the types of things that Amazon wants you to do in order to churn out more writing, more books, to use generative AI, for example, to try to make your process more efficient. And then that slowly bleeds into the traditional publishing world because there's less money to go around, there's more kind of commercial pressures. So all this sort of stuff, while it's not something that's immediately going to move into the creative industries, like there's difficulty with using generative AI tools in traditional film right now because the copyright situation is not totally sorted out. But the pressures are there for it to come in if it's left standing there. And just to pick up on one final point, what you were saying about people kind of losing work to these technologies. I've spoken to writers and to illustrators, and basically what they say is that on the one hand, they're losing work because work is being done by generative AI, and then they're being brought in to kind of fix it up, to make it look better, whether it's to kind of edit generative AI images or to edit generative AI text. But the other piece of that is that a lot of the kind of starter roles within these creative industries are being basically eliminated. The kind of easy work that you would get your start with to build your portfolio that you would then be able to use to get jobs further in the industry, those are being wiped out and replaced with generative AI first. And so it makes it more difficult for people to get into the industry to start these things up. And that's not just a generative AI thing. One of the things that the Writers Guild was fighting about last year was the way that streaming had impacted the way that writing works on a lot of these shows that are done now, where you have these very small writers' rooms where it's more difficult for people to get into it and also to get experience doing production on the actual set, so you're never able to make that jump to produce a writer that was so common in the past. And so, there's all these changes in the way that the labor process works that ultimately breaks down, these kind of creative industries that I think we all value and believe are important.
Yeah.
Just maybe to I don't know. Maybe I'll try to go a bit against the soul. Like, you know, Miyazaki, he's amazing, obviously, and he's so romantic. He's like privileged, I think, in his purity and innocence, even. And yeah, obviously, like seeing all these, like, you know, creepy bodies, whatever. It's like, oh, we don't want to see like machinic kind of acts animating a human-looking entity, and that kind of disturbs us fundamentally, which fair. But then what happens here is like we're trying to put again like the human versus machine kind of a dichotomy that we're trying to push here, right? Like it's as if when we animate the machine or when the machine animates something, it's as if the humanity is going to be lost. Oh my God, this humanness that we had that was so pure is going to go away, I guess. But that's not the case, because they do come back, because the human creativity is obviously something irreplaceable. No matter the labor problems that we're experiencing currently. And I mean, the humanness, you know, asking like, how do we as humans want things, or how do we humans, I mean, who is this we and who are the humans, is such a, again, like it's a fraught challenge to actually define, because the human has been defined by these, again, the white dudes, the bourgeois society, right, since the 17th century. They said it's the man who owns property is the human, and then it became women, and then it became also other minorities. And still there are people that are not considered human, right, like sex-trafficked bodies or Palestinians, I guess, currently. And yeah, so who decides who's human is such a power site that, yeah, I don't know if it's so easy to be like, oh, AI, it does creepy things, or like this video is so bad. And yes, it's bad, but I don't know how that speaks to becoming a threat to like human creativity as such. Again, the culprit is the capitalism, obviously, and okay, that's very sad.
Because what you said reminded me of a short story by Ursula Le Guin. I'm forgetting the name now, but, well, and also The Dispossessed in a way as well, right? But there's this short story where, I think it's in the Hainish cycle, so the protagonist travels to this planet and he finds these communes who are, it's very much a utopian, one of her most utopic short stories, and I'm blanking on the name, but it'll come back. But then the protagonist travels to this planet which functions as communes of really small cities. And basically what she's saying is she is envisioning a whole structure of society that functions in a way that, not humans, humanoids, let's say, where humans can use their potentials to make their own lives better. So there are machines. She's a sci-fi writer first and foremost, right? And there are machines, and there's this whole tech that, again, one of her biggest differences from most writers is that she actually takes time in like explaining how the tech works and how the tech like really allows people to have how it benefits people. And in this story, she describes a society which has structured itself in a way where technology, machines, they are used for agriculture and for all of these like more like hard labor, factory labor, and then the society in the whole can use their time to actually live as a community. And I think that's what we should be striving for, and that's what you said. Like, what does it mean to be a human? I guess it is the biggest question of them all, and for everyone in every field in every area of expertise. But I do think that what we have to question here is what does capitalism wants for us as humans, and how it creates all of these structures that dictate how we live as humans. So I don't see as much of a problem with like Miyazaki, especially because he's a labor leader. Like he's been in the union for years. He's a person like he's very down to earth, like regarding labor. He has adopted like digital animation into like the pipeline of animated work in the studios. It's not like it's handmade, but it also has digital. So he's not as much as a person who's against technology by for the sake of it, but I think he is talking about like the whole thing where we are talking about, like, if these tools are used to take away what makes us humans, then what isn't it for us there, right? Like, do we have to use them in that specific way, right? And like, I think, yes, of course, there's still people who are not considered humans, definitely Palestinians. Right now we know what's going on. And, but I think it boils down to what you were saying, right? It boils down to what does the big capital wants for us? And how can we, I don't know, think in different ways? How can we imagine futures, imagine communities, you know, how, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this goes to my last example, right? Which is this more niche kind of example. But recently, the Criterion Collection announced these new movies they were putting out, and one of them had this kind of cover. And for some reason, it got a lot of pushback of people assuming it was AI. And the artist who did it had to come out and say, like, I did this, it's not AI, like, you know. And I think it speaks to this thing, though, of like another narrative that we're also kind of talking around here is this idea that as AI starts to inundate our lives more, there's going to be this like return to the human, or there's going to be more, I don't know, purchase to human art, human creativity, because we get sick of the AI stuff. But then the flip side of that is that if we're inundated by so much AI stuff, it starts to be the baseline assumption is AI until proven human, you know, like which is what this artist was facing, right? Like it looks like too clean or too something that people just assumed it was AI. And so I guess it's just this question of like, are we going to run into a situation where because we're seeing so much AI stuff that everyone's just going to assume everything's AI until there's some kind of like way to prove that there's a human behind it, you know? And I don't know, that's a tough question.
I think that's already happening to a certain degree, right? Like obviously, if you look at this image, you can see that it has that aesthetic that you kind of expect from these AI-generated works, right? How clean it is and kind of shiny to a certain degree. But I think coming back to something that you were saying earlier about like the misinformation, disinformation kind of stuff, is it's already the fact that when things circulate online, that tends to go against certain people's preconceived notions. There's an immediate, in some circles, and I think it's growing, there's an immediate kind of response as to, is this AI, is this real? You know, in many cases it can be very unharmful, very kind of whatever. You know, it's a picture of the Pope going around wearing a puffy jacket or something, like it doesn't matter. But then there are other things that circulate where, you know, it can actually be important whether it is true or false. And I think it brings us to the broader question, or some of the broader debates that we've been having for the past number of years around kind of the impacts of these technologies, the ways that they're transforming society, the way that we engage with society. I think this idea that because all this AI stuff is around, we're just going to seek out more human-created stuff, I don't actually buy, because I think that we've already seen that when society is kind of filled with, you know, whether it's streaming services and kind of just the TV shows that they pump out there just to fill the catalogs, people will still watch them just because they're there, right? Similar with kind of broadcast and cable networks before. They would make certain kinds of shows because it worked for the particular format, the particular kind of way that they were commercialized. So all of these technologies, when they're deployed by companies toward particular ends, are going to transform the way that we engage with one another, the way that we engage with society, the way that we engage with creative works, with news, whatever. And I think that the broader question is always to ask, like, what are, like, how are those things being transformed? Is that something that's positive? And if it's not positive, how do we kind of stop it, or how do we kind of rein in the negative aspects of that? And that goes for everything, right? Like the discussions that we're having around social media, the discussions around generative AI, the discussions around, you know, these gig work platforms and all this other kind of stuff, right? These companies have immense power to transform the ways that we live, the ways that we engage with other people, and, you know, so many other things in our world. They command a whole lot of power, and they have been able to do so without a lot of pushback, without a lot of criticism for a very long time. And I think that is starting to change, but still developing the power to be able to push back against these things is difficult, and there's still work to be done on that front. I think that we saw some positive examples recently with like the metaverse kind of being laughed out of existence and the crypto wave to kind of transform the financial system and stuff ultimately failing. I think the AI stuff is going to amount to not as much as these companies are leading us to believe, but like in the mid-2010s, I think there's still going to be an impact that maybe we're being distracted from right now, picking up on something that you were saying, you know, with that kind of shadow, that kind of fog, essentially, that's distracting us from the real impacts that are going on here. And so I think that we need to be kind of clued into those things instead of talking about AI potentially, you know, being a threat to humanity in the AGI and all this kind of stuff, which is, of course, what we've been discussing here today.
Right. Either?
I don't know if I have interesting things to say about this, but but I guess to me, maybe I have a question to you guys, like an artist and a journalist. Sorry, I'm not taking over or anything.
Please.
I mean, so does it ultimately matter when an image is circulated and we don't know who the author is? And me, as like an ignorant consumer of media, I don't care. You know, I'm just looking at the aesthetics. If it speaks to me, if it doesn't, whatever. And like, what are the tensions there? What is actually at stake there? Like, I mean, obviously there is money, but is there something else that's going on? Is a question. And then, yeah, for changing things. Like, don't you think journalism should play a very important role? Like, what is happening with tech journalism? It's very interesting, like, especially in Canada. You're in Canada, right? Yeah, what is your take on this? Like, it's not looking very bright, eh?
Do you want to start?
No, you can go on. I'm still.
Okay, sure. Yeah, tech journalism has failed us immensely and continues to, unfortunately. Canadian tech journalism too, but even in the United States, it's changed a bit, but it's still very positive toward these companies and the products that they're putting out into the world. And I would kind of give a few reasons for that, right? I think part of it is the types of people who go in to cover technology are people who are interested in technology and kind of have, you know, already kind of, in some cases, want to believe in the narratives that these companies are putting out there, right? And so they're not as critical toward them when they're initially presented. Some of them, not all of them. By which I mean some of the journalists, not all the journalists. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it that is incredibly important is, of course, the changing of the financial model of journalism. And so you have had newsrooms now for several decades where they have basically been hollowed out, with a lot of journalists being fired, with the changing of the way that reporting is done. You know, you need to constantly have these stories appearing on the website to, you know, have the homepage being updated to keep people engaged, all those sorts of things, which create different sorts of incentives for the way that journalism is done, to have a number of people who are just constantly kind of putting out the news, reporting, you know, whatever kind of comes out there, and not really having the time to put much you know, kind of a critical perspective on whatever these companies are announcing and telling the world, and just kind of re-reporting it, right? And I think that was a serious problem. It's still a problem, but it was more of a problem, you know, a few years ago. And then, of course, along with having fewer resources is not having the resources to actually do the investigative work on these sorts of products, on these services, on the claims that the tech companies are making, and also recognizing that, unfortunately, publishing a lot of these claims, like, I don't know if other people noticed it, but a lot of the media for a long time, some of them still do it, Elon Musk could just tweet something random and they would write a whole news story about it because they knew that was going to kind of get engagement, right? Which is unfortunate. But I think when you're looking at Canada in particular, those problems are even worse than in the United States, right? You have less funding, you have fewer people doing the work of looking at it. So there's even less ability to look at what tech companies in Canada are doing specifically, or to look at particular problems that we're facing when it comes to technology. And I think you've seen that in recent debates around tech issues, like, for example, the regulation of the streaming services, or the recent kind of news code and kind of the engagement around that. And a lot of the narratives around it were, or a lot of the narratives against it, if they weren't just kind of purely industry narratives where, you know, these companies don't want to be regulated, had a really kind of libertarian bent to them, taking from these narratives that come from the United States, and not recognizing that, of course, there are reasons to do these regulations, particularly on American companies that are operating in Canada. But the question was often, or, you know, the criticism against them was often, oh, it's restricting free speech, or maybe Canadians won't be able to see what they want to see on social media platforms, or completely fabricated, you know, concerns about mass regulation of what was happening on YouTube and stuff like that, which was never in the bill in the first place. But these narratives put forward by certain people who, you know, have a particular perspective and are often the people that the Canadian media goes to in order to have commentary on technology, kind of really distorting the ability to have a deeper conversation about what these potential regulations and rules and things might mean for the Canadian public, especially at a time when, you know, there are increasingly important questions to be asking. Yeah.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
I'll be quick. Regarding your question about like what are the issues with AI-generated images, I feel that first and foremost, an AI-generated image means a human lost a gig to be the one creating that image. And like in the first place, it will with time mean less and less jobs for people in the industry. And on the other hand, Andrew DeWard has written a really interesting article on the financialization of Hollywood and how venture capital companies, like the same 3 venture capital companies, own stakes in pretty much every single film production company in the US. And he considers, what does it lead to? Like, what kind of homogenizing, that word is so hard, homogenizing, like, brings to images, to film. What does it, like, what type of aesthetic does it push forward? What type of narrative, what type of movie these companies want to be made, right? So I think that's one thing we have to think about with AI generated images as well. Like if we are having these images saturate the market, they will become an aesthetic by themselves. They will become what the market wants, and they will become what the market dictates it wants. So I think it's those things that we have to consider when thinking about like what are the dangers of these images becoming ubiquitous, right? It's how they relate to who is in charge and what do they want. Also in terms of like cutting costs and aesthetically and figuratively and what they represent. So.
Thanks. Yeah, so don't mean to cut off the conversation, but we just have 15 minutes or so for a Q&A. So please, in the room or on Zoom, send in some questions. And I think one has already come in on Zoom. I don't know.
Yeah, so for those of you on Zoom, you can feel free to type your question in the chat or use the raise hand function. For those of you in the space, you can just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Are there any questions in the space? Yes, I see one.
Hi, thanks. I really enjoyed your talk. Something that doesn't really get brought up in AI discussions around ethics, but that, I don't know, there was an article in Time last summer, I think it was last summer, about the human curation that goes into preparing the data sets. And there was a particularly egregious case of Kenyan workers working for less than $2 an hour being exposed to the worst things on the internet, so that when you use ChatGPT, it isn't just a barrage of racial slurs or whatever. But the ethical upshot of that is that we've got this kind of colonial, racialized exploitation laundering thing happening. And I've kind of lost track of that story. My question is, Did anyone ever actually do anything about that? And is that why we're not hearing about it? Or are we just not hearing about it because we don't want to hear about it?
Yeah, I think you probably have more to add on this. Yeah, that is absolutely a story that was out there. OpenAI was using these Kenyan workers that were, in some cases, being paid less than $2 an hour in order to do kind of the moderation on their tool. So again, as you say, so that it wouldn't be racial slurs and some of the worst stuff that's on the internet being spit out by this large language model when people are putting in their prompts and engaging with it, right? The Wall Street Journal went back and spoke to some of these people, as you were saying. A lot of them reported that their lives had been significantly altered by having to kind of sit down and look at this sort of stuff for 12, 14 hours a day. Their relationships kind of destroyed, all this sort of stuff, and they'd got no mental health supports from the company, either the contracting company or OpenAI, which was kind of benefiting from their labor. Workers in Kenya are organizing, content moderation workers. I believe they formed a union because it's not just OpenAI who is doing this. It's Microsoft and Facebook, and many of these other companies are using workers in Kenya and of course in other countries as well to do this sort of work. I don't know the status of that. Maybe you can speak more on, no, okay. I don't know the status of the unionization. I know that Time spoke to one of the people kind of leading the charge on that. It seemed like they were making some progress, but it's difficult to know for sure. I've kind of lost track of the story as well. I think the bigger thing I would say though is that, certainly this became more noticeable when it was OpenAI, this company that was really in the spotlight because ChatGPT was taking off. But it's also the case for many of the AI tools that are not even generative AI tools that people encounter in their everyday lives, that a lot of these tools being able to work relies on very poorly paid labor on platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk or Clickworker, where people are paid as little as pennies per task in order to kind of label data for AI or make decisions for AI systems. But they are hidden away from all of this when you interact with one of these systems. You're not told that there are humans behind it. One of the stories that stood out to me is during the pandemic, Uber would make kind of drivers and riders take photos of themselves to show that they were wearing a mask, or also to kind of check them against their driver's licenses. And Uber just said that was the AI system that was checking to make sure, matching it with its algorithms or whatever. It was actually sending those tasks to these clickwork platforms for actual people to be paid pennies to check that the images were lining up. So this is a very common practice that a lot of people don't know about, unfortunately.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, what happened with that on the OpenAI side was, OpenAI actually on the GPT-4, they were like, okay, obviously we cannot openly outsource intelligence from Africa, so what are we going to do? They came up with like more an adversarial network approach to deal with their content moderation. I mean, they have the papers going on. Oh, I'm obviously not an AI scientist, I don't understand this stuff, but it doesn't seem like it almost looks more like a cover-up than like an actual engagement, because they didn't really release what GPT-4 is made of, right? So there is no way to check actually what's been going on. But this whole outsourcing of intelligence thing is such a like it's been happening for a while. Just the companies do it more smartly. I guess OpenAI did not just hire another company to do this kind of work. They directly hired workers, whereas Google has been using Lionbridge for I guess almost decades now, where I was a worker too. When I was in Turkey, I was working in this kind of work where you get exposed to all these kinds of like disturbing images or voice notes, to be able to label that kind of data. And of course there is a cost, and obviously obviously there's not a great compensation for it. But Google is, we always say, oh yeah, Google's AI is great, the search engine is just the most amazing thing. And it's like, no, it's actually people that are doing that work like literally almost real time. So I guess the takeaway is that, when we leave the corporate kind of America to derive this kind of innovation sphere, what happens is they are of course going to establish themselves onto lines of production that have already existed, which is the colonial lines of production, which has been the slave trades and all that kind of like the global economies that have been connecting the world for a long time, and that have been source for creating products into the market. So yeah, of course they're gonna go the old way. They're not gonna try to find a new way to do things, obviously. But yeah, I think coloniality and capitalism obviously is also very intertwined. But yeah, in tech world, it's an infestation. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
Great shirt, by the way.
Thanks. I wanted to ask Elena, I made a couple notes. Different times you seem to be getting at the issue of intellectual dishonesty as the sort of the AI creative process as a form of intellectual dishonesty. So since weakened labor rights don't really have, will have a clear avenue for redressing these issues. I wonder if the avenue is consumer protection against safety, a sort of pushback on the always beta kind of that's so prevalent in software being adapted into hardware, and sort of an avenue of fraudulent claims about both the technology or the artistic process to put some speed bumps in adoption.
I mean, I'm not really sure I get your question, though. I'm not really sure I understood your question.
Whether you think that the way in which AI falsifies the creative process produces like a claim for people who consume creative content, and so laundering the images through studios that have to, the cleanup work, and then presented as sort of made by humans or enhanced by humans, or blur the line between what is assisting humans versus when humans are assisting AI. That's one way to for creative labor to sort of ally with consumers, I guess.
I think this is something very new, right? We also saw the example of the horror movie that just came out that used AI for its illustrations, and then the people online, the majority of the discourse was like, I'm not going to watch this anymore. So I think from what I have observed is that overall the consumers are with the workers, like consumers overall, right? Like it's something that's still very much ongoing. It's very new. It's very recent. So I think what we can observe is that consumers do not want to be fed artificially created images or films, especially if they don't know that's what that these were the tools used to create it. I think overall there is a consensus that but I think that is also because the most vocal people, right, online, and the most vocal people in regarding creative industries are fans or people who avidly consume that kind of thing. So I think these would also be the most critical people, regarding the use of AI tools. As you said, you used the term I'm an average viewer. I don't think this is something that the average viewer is concerning themselves right now. The Marvel intro was a good example because it touched upon a really popular piece of culture, right? It really ubiquitous, which is Marvel productions. And when that came out, I remember that there was this whole conversation around even Marvel fans of being oh, this is lazy. Marvel does have money to pay real artists. And legally speaking, I think that does constitute, I'm not an expert in that, but I think it does constitute what's the word in legalese? I forgot the specific word in legal language, but it does constitute basis for artists to initiate conversations with associations and unions and guilds in order to create some type of protection for them, because you are seeing the consumers who are kind of the endpoint for these products, right? They do not want to consume that. But again, I think it's a very small parcel of consumers who are vocal, who are part of a fandom, who are people who naturally engage with this. But I do think there is there is a conversation between artists and consumers, and they're pretty much, I think we're all on the same side. I think people who avidly consume media, they don't want to be consuming media that they would know was not created by humans. But again, this is very new, and I don't think. I hope
you're right.
I hope I'm right as well. I have no recollection of like reading any academic papers on this and people like building this connection between what fans want or not, because it's still, again, very, very recent that we've seen like the real consequences of these tools being used in media and entertainment, right? They were being used before in different industries, but I guess for media and entertainment is very, very new stuff. And voice actors, actually, they have been replaced longer now because voice AI is something that is more advanced, and there is a lot of backlash. So for instance, in countries such as Japan, who has like a long history of like voice acting stardom, and like they are as famous as live action actors, there has been a lot of backlash against using AI generated voices. But also Japan is the country that invented VTubers, so which is something that feeds on that technology as well. So it's a whole other conversation. But I hope I'm right in saying that, like, for now, what we see, what we can observe is that media consumers have been more on the side of the workers. I guess more and more people are realizing that we are all the same. If we're not billionaires owning the companies and making the hedge fund decisions, we are kind of the same, right? So I hope so. I don't know, but.
Yeah, all right, we're out of time. We're being cut off. I want to thank my panel. I want to thank all of you and on Zoom for coming. Let's keep imagining otherwise. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you to Jake and all of the panelists for coming into ForSpace today, for activating this conversation. Thank you everyone online and here in the space for your questions as well. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and live stream now, but a quick reminder that this conversation is already available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. So please join us again at ForSpace. We love having you. Have a great day.